And that's what we did during the straw poll, and that's what we've continued to build on since then. And so we're very pleased that we worked as hard as we did. And we have a very strong base in Iowa, but we're continuing to work on that. We've held 2 meetings today, one in Storm Lake this morning at 9 o'clock, and after that we went to Webster City, Iowa, and we'll be traveling on today. So that's what we're doing. We're doing exactly what needs to be done, meet with the voters, hear what they have to say, and continue to go on and then progress. And we're following the schedule, which is Iowa first, then New Hampshire, then South Carolina and on. So we like the schedule, and we're working it very hard.
Good.
Why do you think it is that your poll numbers have fallen so since the straw poll?
Well, I think no one has ever seen an election quite like this one. The beauty of politics is that it's always the unexpected, isn't it? And in this one, no one thought that I had a chance to win the straw poll. Everyone said it's never going to happen, but we did. We won. And part of it is because I'm an extremely hard worker. Our team is a very hard-working team. We all work together, and my message resonated with the voters in Iowa. And as we have seen throughout this debate, everyone thought that it'd be, on any given day, they thought, well, this candidate will be the next president. This candidate will be the next president. And it's continually changing. If there's anything that we've seen, it's the fluidity of the race. And we're seeing candidates go up and candidates go down, and it certainly isn't locked in cement by any stretch of the imagination. And so we see our candidacy on the upswing right now. We certainly see that where we're going, meeting with voters on a regular basis. National beauty pageant polls are one thing, the Iowa poll is another, but we're drilling down even deeper person by person. We're very excited with what we're seeing. And we're seeing with new information comes out about the candidates, this is a good process. I will tell you, it is exacting, it's difficult. It's one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life, but it's good. I defend this process because it's tough. After all, we are vying to be the next leader of the free world. The voters need to know who we are, what we're made of, how we tick. And so it's, I've gotten my body blows. The other candidates are getting their body blows. This is a good process. We need to go before the people and be vetted. And so I'm grateful for it, and I defend this process.
What were some of the body blows that you got?
I think early on, when my numbers were also very high, I think people looked, for instance, at me and my background. I'm an unapologetic social conservative, and so I was being attacked just for social conservative positions, but I've never apologized for the fact that I'm pro-life, or I've never apologized for the fact that I stand for marriage between a man and a woman and for religious liberty. And so attacks came from that score, but, I was very happy to take on the issue.
Well, on that point, you have carved out a fairly narrow slice of the Republican Party. How, if you are the nominee, how do you reach out and bring in the middle, not only of the Republican Party, but of America?
Well, I think that's the beauty of what I saw happen at the straw poll. Every stop that I went to, almost every day, I would do about 6 stops a day during the straw poll. And at almost every stop, someone would come up to me afterwards and say, Michele, I'm a Democrat. I voted for Barack Obama, but I'm voting for you. And then people would say, Michele, I voted for Barack Obama. I'm an independent, but I'm going to vote for you. We saw that stop after stop after stop. I think that's exactly what we're going to see. This election, more than any other, people are not interested in Republican or Democrat. They really aren't. It isn't that they have affiliation with the party. It's who is the person, who is the candidate. And there is very strong bipartisan agreement that we're in a steep decline in the economy. So people want someone who will be a unifier. I can be a unifier. That's what I've done. I am elected in Minnesota, which is not known for being a conservative state. I'm the first Republican woman ever to get elected out of Minnesota to go to the Capitol to represent my state. I'm proud of that distinction. But also, I did it not by tap dancing. I'm not a politician. I'm a real person. I was 50 years old when I went to Congress. I'm 55 years of age now, and I've been very forthright and very bold about my positions. One thing people have always appreciated about me is that I mean what I say what I mean, and I don't dance around. I'm very forthright. I think that kind of frankness people are looking for, and they want someone with a real plan to be able to deal with the economy. I'm a former federal tax lawyer. I get taxes, and my husband and I have started a business from scratch, and we run it profitably. We get the travails that a small business person goes through. And so I also sit on Financial Services Committee. And so I've got that kind of a background to be able to deal with the economy, and I think I've got the right solutions to turn the economy around. That is the number one issue in this race, jobs in the economy. But I also have the background and the benefit of serving on the House Intelligence Committee, which is dealing with the nation's classified secrets. Now that issue is rising. It wasn't rising before in the campaign, but the issue of dealing with national security is rising because of the IAEA report that just came out last week dealing with the threat of a nuclear weapon on the part of Iran. I think that will continue to be front and center, and it needs to be, because I think we're seeing that the United States is in a more vulnerable position than we have before. A lot of that has to do with the fact of the super committee. And here again, I was a lone voice in the wilderness of Washington, D.C. last summer. I was one of the only voices that said, we have enough revenue coming in to pay the interest on the debt. Let's do that. Let's not see our credit rating go down. But all 535 of us should be here in D.C. right now and look for how we're going to cut a significant portion out of the budget. It'd be painful to have to make the cuts, but we need to do that because we can't continue to borrow at the level we're borrowing. So I drew a line in the sand, and I was a lone voice, but here we are. We saw our credit rating downgraded, and here we are kicking the can down the road maybe 5 months later, and we're no closer to any sort of a deal. In fact, it looks like there's going to be a train wreck. And if we have a train wreck, this is what's going to happen. We're either going to see massive tax increases that are going to hurt job creation, or we're going to see massive cuts to our military. We absorbed about $400 billion in cuts this summer. Now we're looking at absorbing another $600 billion. And we need look no further than Defense Secretary Panetta, who said to John McCain, that if the super committee prevails and we have, or doesn't prevail, however it works out, that there are $600 billion in automatic cuts, if that happens, we could be looking at sending the armed forces back down to troop levels of 1940. And we'd be looking at sending the number of ships that we have back to 1914 levels. And our Air Force would be at its lowest level of aircraft. It's coming at the worst possible time, because the economy is flat on its back, and then you would gut the military at the same time. It doesn't take much imagination to figure out what that means for our vulnerability in terms of national security. It wouldn't be a good scenario.
Before we get into that, I want to go back just a little. You've covered a lot of ground here, but you talked about the debate which led to the super committee being created about raising the debt limit. Do you still feel that it was wrong to raise the debt limit then? And what do you think the impact would have been on our credit rating if we had not?
I think it was wrong to raise the debt ceiling. We raised it by $2.4 trillion. Let me give you the context. The day that I came into the United States Congress, we were in debt $8.67 trillion. It took us 219 years to accumulate $8.67 trillion in debt. Here we are today. We're just about at that 15 trillion bubble level of debt. So we have gone in a little over 4 years' time from 8.67 trillion in debt to 15 trillion. By next year, it will be at minimum 16.7 trillion in debt. That's almost doubling the national debt in 5 years. What's changed is the velocity of spending. We've never spent at this level, because you can just look at the contrast. In 2007, the debt for the year was $160 billion. Last month, in October, the debt was $203 billion, just for 1 month. It's the velocity of spending, the velocity of debt accumulation. It's so much so that in October, that works out to $650 for every man, woman, and child in the United States. So for a family of 4, that's $2,300 in additional debt that they have to pay for. So what families are seeing, and what anyone is seeing, is that Congress spends money faster than people can earn it to pay it off.
What is the net effect of saying we're not going to borrow another dime starting tomorrow?
The net effect is to say that we will pay the interest on the debt. That's what Standard & Poor's, Moody's, that's what they look at. Can you finance the debt? Pardon?
Which is how much per year?
The debt? The
Right.
interest on the
What
debt?
is the interest on the debt?
The interest on the debt is getting worse. It was about 6%. I don't know what it is now, but I know that it will be doubling in 10 years.
So if you
And it will be at a level, or let me correct that. We will be spending more money on interest on the debt in 10 years than we are on the military.
Right.
That's the
So-
figure that I meant to.
So that's my question. If you pay the interest on the debt and the things that we have to pay for, Social Security, et cetera, then everything else would have gone away the next day?
But what we need to do is not avoid reform. That's what every administration does, including Republican. This isn't just Democrat. This is all administrations. They're avoiding the tough issue, which is reform, and that's what we have to do. We have to reform the programs that we have today. I mean, consider, when I was born here in Iowa, we didn't even have Medicare. It wasn't until I was about a 10-year-old that we had Medicare. And in that time, we have a program now that's a good 45 years of age. It's time to have reform. We've got to reform the program, because the way that it's going now, those numbers on spending aren't going to stay at a plateau. They're going to escalate.
So what does Medicare reform look like under your
I think
policy?
I like the direction that Paul Ryan had suggested, which is to take a look at how we are subsidizing health insurance. And it isn't just for senior citizens. I want to change health care for all Americans. Today we have, in essence, what will be socialized medicine with Obamacare. And what I want to do is allow all Americans, I want to end the monopoly that insurance companies have in every state. And I want to let every American and every Iowan buy any insurance plan they want anywhere in the United States with no federal requirements, no minimum requirements. Then pay for that policy with their own tax-free money, whether it's the premium or the deductible or the copay or their pharmaceuticals, or if they go to the chiropractor. I want them to be able to pay for that with their own tax-free money. Then I want to have true medical malpractice liability reform, because that deals with the cost issue. The other thing I'd like to do is offer a liability shield to any doctor or nurse or drug company or clinic or hospital that wants to offer free care to poor people. When I was a little girl in Waterloo, my mom would take us to the doctor, and they would say, well, we don't run to the doctor. That's what my parents would say. But they would take us, and a doctor's visit was $5. And so we would go and see the doctor, but the doctor also saw people who couldn't pay. But he just didn't charge people who truly couldn't afford it. And he knew if somebody was abusing the system or not, and they just didn't charge. But today it's different. You've got people who sue you. And so doctors are in a very different position. And I think if we want to encourage people to offer care free to people who truly, through no fault of their own, can't afford it, we should. And one thing we could do is offer a liability shield, because the biggest problem in healthcare is cost. That's the main problem. And President Obama said that every household would save $2,500 a year if we went with Obamacare. I haven't met one Iowan yet who's told me that they've saved $2,500 a year in their health insurance premiums. In fact, it's going just the opposite. So my plan addresses the issue of cost, and that's what I want to do.
Are there parts of the health reform bill and law that you think should remain, that you think are valuable?
No, absolutely not. My bill, I brought 40,000 Americans to Washington, D.C. to fight against Obamacare, because Obamacare will be more expensive than anyone begins to dream it will be. It'll be terribly expensive. Just at the last time that we need a new entitlement program, we're getting one when we can least afford it. So number one, we can't afford the cost of it. But number two, we're seeing that it will already restrict doctors. And I'll give you one example. I was in Rock Rapids doing a town hall. A physician stood up. He was a family practice guy, very tall guy. And he stood up and he said, Michelle, let me tell you what just happened to me because of Obamacare. Because the IRS is enforcing Obamacare. They're hiring 16,500 new agents to enforce Obamacare. And he said, guess how long I had to call the IRS, because I had a woman on Medicare, and I had to get a number for her. And he said, guess how long I was on the phone with the IRS while she waited in my office? And I said, how long? And he said, 2 hours and 15 minutes. He said, I am so frustrated. This is what Obamacare is going to mean for me. And it wasn't just her that waited. His time was wasted. And all the other patients that were sitting in his waiting room, they also had to get stacked up too. This is the kind of bureaucratic, heavy system that we have. I want to get rid of Obamacare. I wrote the legislation. I'm the first member of Congress to introduce a bill to repeal Obamacare. I want to repeal it and then put my plan into effect that actually addresses the cost issue.
How does your plan help, in the form of a tax break, help somebody who works for a small company, doesn't have a company-provided health care plan now, and can't afford to buy one? How does that non-existent tax break in that person's case work for him under your plan?
It absolutely helps them because now they can buy the cheapest possible plan that they can get. I think what a lot of people will do is buy catastrophic health insurance plans. And then what we'll be seeing under my plan is we'll be encouraging new, for example, like minute clinics to grow up. So when, let's say somebody has their child at a soccer game and they have an injury in soccer, they can run their kid there and get them seen immediately by a doctor and pay for that. Because that's the biggest problem in healthcare right now is the third-party intermediaries. No one even knows what healthcare costs anymore because either the government is involved, and the government by far is the largest purchaser of healthcare in the United States for one particular entity. And so what I want to do is be able to reintroduce the free market into healthcare so that people own their plans.
What type of health care coverage have you had over your career? Has it always been government?
No,
healthcare?
It hasn't. No.
I mean, when you worked for the IRS, you've been in Congress, et cetera. I mean,
right, but we've
been...
also been without, and we've also purchased on our own. And one of the biggest problems with tax code has been that individuals cannot deduct their health insurance on their income tax. Businesses can, but not people. And that's wrong.
The tax break helps the individual.
Well, I introduced the bill in Congress that is the Healthcare Freedom of Choice Act. And that would allow Americans to be able to purchase a health insurance policy and deduct it on their income tax. They should be able to do that, just like a company can. They should.
What law does is protect people, though, people who the insurance company won't sell insurance to. What do you propose for that? People with pre-existing conditions who can't purchase health insurance.
Well, I think, again, it is the marketplace that knows how to best determine those costs. Right now, government is determining the cost of health care, and all we're seeing is escalated costs. The market needs to make that determination. But it isn't that people necessarily have to go without health care. Insurance is one thing. Health care is another. And states have come up with various solutions. High-risk pools are something that various states have come up with. And there are always going to be people that have chronic conditions or that have pre-existing conditions. And that doesn't limit the states. The states can come up with high-risk plans, and I believe that they will. They have in the past. I'm not sure the exact number, but I think it's 30-some states have high-risk pools. And what they try to do then is, at the state level, put together a subsidy so that people can pay what would be more of a normal price for health insurance, and then the state comes in and pays the difference. And if that's what a state chooses to do, I think I encourage that. But again, we also want to offer charitable organizations or doctors or clinics to offer care to people who are indigent or people who are in a difficult place. The thing is, health care will be provided. The question really is, what is the cheapest way, the most cost-effective way to get the highest quality care? We want the greatest number of people to have the highest quality of care at the lowest possible price. That is not what we're getting with government being the chief purchaser of health care in the United States. And by chief, I mean the entity that purchases the greatest amount of health care. We aren't getting a good value for that dollar. And so health care is a big issue. But the one thing we do know is that Obamacare will break the bank. We cannot afford Obamacare. And that isn't Michele Bachmann saying that. That's Kathleen Sebelius saying that, the Health and Human Services Secretary, who recently said that we can't have the long-term component of the Obamacare bill, which is the Class Act portion, because there's not enough money. They admit there's not enough money. We haven't even gotten this balloon off the ground yet, because in order to make the numbers work for Obamacare over a 10-year period, they had to have all the revenues up front and the expenditures coming later. That's the only way they could make the game work. And we tried to expose what a fraud this is, that Obamacare will never be able to pay for itself, and of course it won't. And we also see this stunning level of power that the government has. Because with Obamacare, there's already been over 6,000 pages of rules and regulations that have been written. It isn't even just the bill. This is a bill that will never finish being written, and that's why UBS came out with a study, maybe it's 2 months ago now, and they said that the number one reason why employers aren't hiring, it's Obamacare. It's because today employers know that every employee that they hire will have at least a $2,000 price on their head, because if they don't offer health insurance, they'll have to pay a fine to the government, and it will be at least $2,000. And of course, that's the teaser rate. What government will do is anytime it needs more revenue, it will dial up the rate that employers have to pay. It'll be far more than $2,000. And so employers are very reluctant to hire new employees right now because they know the costs are exponential dealing with health care.
You've made some comments about the Gardasil vaccine. Do you think vaccines are dangerous? And did you vaccinate your own children?
Sure, we vaccinated our own children. They went through and had the normal course of measles, mumps, and rubella, and TB, and all of the baby shots that they had to have. They had them. I had them when I was a baby. But we've seen a marked difference in the number of vaccinations that children have. It's far more than they used to have, and more are being encouraged all the time. That's really a decision that parents need to make on behalf of their children. That's the point that I was making in the debates, that this is a decision not for a governor to make, not to abuse his executive authority, which Governor Perry admitted he did abuse that authority. This is a decision that rightly that parents and children have to make. But the more important issue in all of this was the issue of crony capitalism. And it was the idea of a politician paying off their political donors with either mandates or with government contracts. In the area, at the federal level, the biggest scandal that we hear a lot about now is Solyndra. There's a new one that's coming out with the SIGA. There was Light Squared. There's Beacon Power. This happens all the time, and it's scandalous. No politician should be paying off their political donors.
But you don't have concerns about the safety of the vaccine. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm not a doctor. I am not a scientist. I'm not making that point. My point in the course of the debate was abuse of executive power and also crony capitalism.
You talked about Iran and the nuclear question of the nuclear weapons report. Well, how would you deal with that issue if you were president?
Well, number one, going back to the time when President Obama came into place, it was naive at best and deadly foolish at worst for the president to meet with Iran with no preconditions. That was unprecedented. This is a nation that has violated one issue after another with the IAEA. They've been unwilling to let inspectors in, and there's all sorts of problems with Iran. And Iran has stated repeatedly, over and over again, that once they gain a nuclear weapon, they would use it to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And so the president sat down and met with them the administrations met with them with no pre-existing conditions. And what the president gave Iran was the luxury of time to continue unabated to develop a nuclear weapon. This is extremely serious. It is the number one threat that faces the nation, not only our nation, but other nations across the world, because we know what Iran will do. They will share the information, technology, and power of a nuclear weapon, not only with themselves, they'll share it with Syria, which is a courier for them, a courier to their proxy organizations, which are Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in the Gaza area, and they'll share it with Sudan. What we're seeing is President Obama made what I believed was a wrong decision in the treaty with Russia last December. We are seeing a denuclearization, if you will, of the wealthy nations, while third world basket case nations are getting nuked up. This has very serious and profound implications. And Iran is a Shia nation, as you know, and we'll see the call for nuclear weaponry in the Sunni as well. And so we will be seeing a nuclearized Middle East. And I don't think that will lead to peace. Ultimately, what I want as President of the United States is peace. I want to see peace not only for the United States, but peace in the Middle East region, peace around the world. And to be a world at peace, I think that the United States has been a good global leader. We're not perfect. We've made a lot of mistakes. But I think that we want to make sure that the United States is in a position of strength.
How do we achieve peace in the Middle East with Iran as a nuclear power? I mean, that.
Well, it's very difficult, isn't it? It's very difficult.
Aside from the mistakes you believe have been made in the past, okay, you're in the White House now. What are you going to do?
Would you support a preemptive strike, for example?
Well, there will be likely three scenarios. Either Iran may make a strike, Israel may make a strike or the U.S. could make a strike. I would hope that it would not be the U.S. that would be making that strike. Hopefully no one would make that strike. But right now, Iran hasn't gotten the signal from anyone that they have something to lose if they continue to go forward. They have continued to develop not only the enriched uranium, but also the ability to deliver a nuclear weapon. They have continued to go forward unabated in a manner that has put not only the United States at risk, but the rest of the world at risk.
So what is the signal that needs to be sent? What needs to be done vis-a-vis Iran right now?
Well, right now, again, President Obama has taken this off of the table, which is extremely foolish, in my opinion. We need to isolate Iran economically. We can. If he is, pardon me?
More so than we already have.
We haven't done anything. As far as I'm concerned,
there are no sanctions in place against.
No, I'm not saying. I'm not saying there aren't
against.
any that are meaningful, because the meaningful
the
meaningful sanctions would be with the Iranian central banking community, so that they wouldn't have access to funds. We could shut them down in a heartbeat if we were able to stop money from flowing to Iran. If they couldn't sell oil and receive money in return, and that you have to have a banking system to do that, they'd be done. And President Obama has been unwilling to do that to Iran. I think that's been tragic. He's failed
and you are.
He's failed to bring the Russians and the Chinese and those that he needs to bear, because I believe that he's taken his eye off the central issue, which is dealing with the nuclear Iran. Instead, he was diverted with Libya. I came out immediately and said that I was opposed to what the president was doing in Libya, not because I'm such a fan of Muammar Gaddafi, or was a fan of Muammar Gaddafi, but at that point, Libya was not posing a threat to the United States, and that isn't me saying it. At that time, we had Secretary of Defense Gates. Secretary of Defense Gates said there was no American national interest, and there was no mission in Libya. Why are we going into a country when there's no vital American national interest and no mission? That was wrong for the United States to be there. What we need to do is focus on Iran.
Were we in that country?
Well, we started the effort. We unilaterally began the bombing. President Obama did that and made that decision while Congress was still in session. I was in Washington the week that he made that decision. He moved forward. Congress was there. He did not consult Congress. He said he didn't have to. I believe he did. He went forward and he made that effort, and unilaterally we were there. Only after the United States began the bombing did we then join up with NATO. But again, don't forget who provides the number one source of funding for NATO. We do. We provide that money, and also Secretary of Defense Gates came out just before he resigned and said that NATO needs to start paying their own freight. We've been paying their freight for them. We've been providing the defense for Europe. That needs to end. Europe needs to stand on their own 2 feet. We need to stop providing their defense for them. We are far too extended beyond what we should be. We can't afford that. And I am not one who says that we can't cut back on defense. We can. Let me tell you one area. We have a real problem when it comes to procurement. There is a military industrial complex in Washington, D.C., and the issue of procurement is scandalous, where today we have a cost plus fee basis, and we pay based upon how much time it takes to develop a weapon. Now, if you go order a couch, you don't pay more money if it takes longer to build that couch, but that's what the federal government does. We pay more money based upon how much time it was. We need to have a fixed price system where we say, look, we'll pay you X amount for this aircraft carrier, X amount for this weapon, and that's it. And then you figure it out and you get it developed. Instead, we're getting played all the time on procurement. And this is wrong, and that has to change. TRICARE is something else that I think that could be reformed. It isn't that I want to cut back on benefits for service people, but TRICARE is also something that needs to be reformed.
In the recent debate on foreign policy, you broke ranks with some of your competitors and said that you supported waterboarding, had no problem with that. Is the notion of torture being acceptable consistent with your general faith and values?
Well, I don't accept your premise that that is torture.
You don't?
I don't accept that as a premise.
What do you think it is?
It was called an enhanced interrogation technique that was used to bring about information. I think I would really go back to the example of Harry Truman. Harry Truman was asked about his decision to drop the bomb in Japan. That was a terrible decision that Harry Truman had to make. He made it. And he said, if I have to kill 1,000 Japanese to save one American life, I will. And he made that decision. So let me finish. So in that vein, if I, as President of the United States, had someone who was a terrorist, and the waterboarding was done on Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the admitted mastermind of 9/11, and it was said later by the Vice President that we did extract useful information from him that helped prevent other incidents. If I had knowledge that we could use something like a waterboarding to be able to save the American people, would I use that? Yes, I would, because waterboarding does not kill anyone. Is it uncomfortable? Yes, it's uncomfortable. But I am more concerned that we would prevent aircraft from going into the Twin Towers, taking them down, and taking out 3,000 innocent American lives than I am about the comfort level of a terrorist and what that means for them. Because, again, this is done under monitored conditions. Where is it uncomfortable? Yes. I don't deny that it's uncomfortable. But a person is not going to lose their life, nor will they be permanently injured or permanently impaired by this. This is, and it's done on very unique, strict circumstances.
But at the point,
Here's the other problem. What is it that President Obama is doing today? We no longer have CIA interrogators. CIA interrogators no longer are able to deal with enemy combatants. All we have is the Army Field Manual, and we publish it online. So any terrorist can see what's going to happen to them when they're captured. And it's, in effect, they know exactly what we're going to do to them. And so they don't fear. There is no fear. There is no respect for the United States because they know exactly what's going to happen. And something else that I brought up in the debate is we no longer have a place to put them in jail once we capture them. Now, there are ships, but that's not a long-term solution. We have Bagram Air Force Base, but that's not really a detention facility if all we're using is the Army Field Manual. When are we going to recognize we're at war? We're at war with an enemy that means business. Our enemy sees that we're at war. They're acting like we're at war. We're the ones that are acting like we're not at war. We're at war with an enemy that wants to see us defeated and dead, so much so that it wasn't that many weeks ago that we saw Iran try an international assassination plot on U.S. soil. They wanted to carry this out at a restaurant that presumably would be filled with members of Congress and senators and hundreds of innocent Americans. And they had no compunctions about killing all these innocent Americans here in Washington, D.C., in our nation's capital.
But just getting back to the question of waterboarding, you said it's being done on terrorists, but actually it's being done as an interrogation technique to determine whether or not people were terrorists. These people have not been tried with any, or, found guilty.
KSM is the admitted mastermind of 9/11.
But
He's not the only one that's been waterboarded.
He admitted his guilt and also wanted to be executed. There's no reason why we, and those determinations need to be made by the president and those who are in that hierarchy grid of authority. Certainly not everyone is waterboarded, nor is everyone waterboarded. It's an extraordinary technique, and all I'm saying is that I think that a president needs to have that technique on the table.
If you think it's not that bad, would you ever willingly submit to it just to see what it's like?
Well, I think that would be absurd to have the President of the United States submit themselves to waterboarding. There are those who have submitted themselves to it so that they can talk about it and speak about it afterwards. But again, let's look at the context. The United States of America was attacked in an act of war. We lost the Twin Towers. We lost 3,000 innocent Americans. Flight 93 went down over Pennsylvania, and innocent lives were lost. The Pentagon had a plane flown into, and we lost hundreds of innocent lives there. This is a very real issue. I take it seriously, And as President of the United States, and as in particular as Commander-in-Chief, I will do what I have to do to keep the American people safe. We are probably at greater risk now than when President Obama came into office because you are looking at the specter of a nuclear Iran. This changes the equation
But how do you,
and could potentially change the course of history.
how do you respond to a person like John McCain, who would also say he takes it very seriously and argues that we, by using torture, which is his definition of the word, has actually made us less safe as a result?
Well, number one, I have the deepest admiration and respect for John McCain. He is a true American hero, and I respect him. I respect his opinion. But he and I would disagree on this issue. I see that this is an enhanced interrogation technique that should be something that is available to a president of the United States. Limited use, undoubtedly, but something nonetheless, in the right circumstance, if a president needs to employ this, should be in that toolbox. And that's where we disagree. I do not believe that this makes us less safe. I think we are more safe if we are able to get the best intelligence and the best information. I think we're also seeing a different type of war. It's the wars, the level of threats that we're looking at today aren't as much geopolitical nation states that are suited up in uniforms on battlefields. It's not as much like that. We still have that element. But we're really dealing with the threats today through interrogation. Our best answers can be done through detention, rendition, interrogation, and that's why we need to have the interrogation. But we also need to have detention. I would continue and keep open Guantanamo Bay, because we have to have somewhere to have people that are in detention. And then also it's our special forces. Our special forces proved themselves, certainly with bin Laden. And we need to make sure that we have the resources so that we have special forces. Because it's a different kind of enemy, it's a different kind of war, it's a different kind of battlefield, and we need to be able to adapt to that threat.
Are there any areas where you think President Obama has done a good job?
Sure, I think he made the right decision to take out Osama bin Laden. I took on Ron Paul in the last debate on that issue. I felt that Ron Paul, I disagreed with him. He felt that it was wrong for the president to have made the decision to take out bin Laden and to take out Alaki. Alaki, as you know, is the one who was the chief recruiter. He recruited Major Hassan, who was responsible for the Fort Hood massacre and all of the Americans that were killed there. He was responsible for recruiting the underwear bomber, or the Christmas Day bomber, that wanted to take out an airliner over the city of Detroit. He was responsible for recruiting the Times Square bomber, who was not successful, but who said before a federal judge that we are at war and we're going to continue to be at war. And so he was very active and very involved in recruitment. And it was right that President Obama made those decisions. I also commended the president when he chose not to have a new helicopter built, a new Marine One, because, again, the procurement process was broken. It was far more expensive than it needed to be. He understood that, and I appreciated him from doing that as well. The president, it isn't that every decision President Obama makes is wrong. They aren't. He makes decisions that I can agree with. But I think the general direction that he has taken the country has been a disaster, and I disagree with him. There are some decisions that he's made as right, and I thank him for that. But I think that certainly I don't believe that he deserves to have a second term. He doesn't have the formula for turning the economy around, and I think he has weakened the United States, and it made us more vulnerable to enemy attack.
So what is your formula for turning the economy around?
My formula for turning the economy around is found at MichelleBachmann.com. It is real jobs right now. It's an 11-point plan, and it really begins as a basis, as a comprehensive plan. It's a tax code, but it's more than a tax code. And number one, I am probably more committed than any other candidate in this field to the full repeal of Obamacare. I'm committed to the full repeal of Dodd-Frank. I wrote both pieces of legislation, and I call it the Jobs and Housing Destruction Act, so I'm committed to that. Let me add this on Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank mandated that 400 rules be written. About 26% of those rules have been written so far. The estimate is that just the 26% of the rules that have been written will require annually 11 million man-hours. Just by way of comparison, Building the Empire State Building, which at that time was the tallest building in the world, required 7 million man-hours. So this is the level of cost that we're going to have added onto the economy. It won't add. It's going to subtract from the economy. And so this is one more reason why we have to get rid of it. So I'll repeal those two pieces of legislation. For 4 years, I've been working on the issue of legalizing American energy production in the all of the above plan. That's what I will do, legalize American energy production. That's 1.4 million jobs that we can create. It will increase America's domestic supplies by 50%. I want to see us get back down to what gasoline was a gallon the day that Barack Obama took office. It was on average $1.79 a gallon. I would love to see us get back to that. If we can increase supply and if we can stabilize the value of the dollar or strengthen it, that will help. That's part of the reason, too, why we're seeing gas escalate.
You've been a foster parent, talking about, most
But
of
my
the
tax plan, can I talk about my tax plan? I also want to kill $1.8 trillion worth of job-killing annual regulations. I want to deal with the illegal immigration problem. I'm the first candidate to sign a pledge that says I will build a fence on the southern border, and I want to deal with welfare benefits to illegal aliens and also make English the official language of the country. On my tax policy, I want to abolish the United States tax code. I'm a former federal tax lawyer. And I want to have essentially a flat tax system, but one that recognizes that people who make more need to pay more. They need to not pay any less than people who are at the middle and lower income level. And that's unfortunately what Herman Cain and Rick Perry's plans do. They actually have people at the middle and lower income level pay more than people at the higher end. I want to make it truly flat so that people aren't disadvantaged at the middle and lower level. I also want to make sure that the same rules apply to everyone. And I also want to make sure that everyone pays something. And this is a departure from all of the candidates.
Even poor people.
I believe that everybody needs to pay something. Even if it's only $10 a year, that might be all that some people can afford.
So you're in favor of raising taxes for poor people?
What I'm in favor of is doing away with the EITC.
Doing away with
their earned income tax credit, because that takes millions of people off of the tax rolls and it sends them a check every year. Something happens to people's mindset. When 47% of the American people pay zero federal income tax and 53% of the American people pay the rest of the income tax, the top 1% of income earners in the United States pay 40% of all federal income taxes. Now that's interesting.
Nothing. Some pay nothing, so would
And
you
that's
make
what's
sure
wrong.
that they paid?
That's what's wrong.
And how about
That-
corporations that
that's-
pay nothing?
And that's what's wrong. Because today, or I think it was this last year, Whirlpool Corporation paid like minus 11%. You have
So you would
GE paid
eliminate
7%
tax credits
effective
to
tax
corporations
rate.
as well?
Pardon?
You would eliminate tax credits to corporations
What I would
that
want,
give them
what I want to do
money
is,
from the Treasury.
What I want to
in
do
effect.
again, and by abolishing the tax code, that would deal with businesses as well. And our tax rate's too high. I mean, let's face it. The combined effective rate of the federal and state tax burden, because all states are a little bit different, is about 40%. That's really the only thing you need to know about why we're seeing jobs leave the United States. When a lot of countries today have 25% corporate tax rates and falling, and we're weighing it in at 40%. That's why one manufacturer in West Des Moines told me, hey, I bought a piece of equipment for $1 million, and I could either put it in West Des Moines or I could put it in my Canadian plant where the tax rate is 18%. Where would you go? He said, I put it up in Canada. And when I sent that piece of equipment up there, it wasn't just the piece of equipment, it was the jobs that went with it. We have got to be competitive. Number one, we have to be competitive in the world. And we're stifling ourselves right now, and we're deluding ourselves if we're embracing a dependency culture that looks like Greece, and if we're being uncompetitive like the old Western European nations that we used to laugh at. When we're doing that, then we're disadvantaging ourselves in terms of competitiveness. And that's why I think that we need to change the mindset in the United States that everybody pays something. Because I'll tell you, growing up in Iowa, I mean, there was a couple of adages that my parents told me. One of them was, nobody owes you a living. Nobody owes you a living. You got to work. And not everybody can work. I mean, we get that. There are people who are physically disabled or mentally disabled. They can't. Nobody begrudges anybody for that reason. But nobody owes you a living is a pretty good Iowa adage. Something else my parents taught me was an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. In other words, You got to work for your employer. You can't just expect to get paid.
So does
And
that mean
the other thing
eliminating
is keep
welfare
your word.
programs totally?
Pardon?
Does that mean eliminating welfare programs totally?
It means taking a look at what Lyndon Johnson put into place in the mid-'60s. What I want to do is go through the Great Society programs, and I think a lot of them need to be ended. And I think the states need to make the decision about if they want them or not. We didn't have food stamps before 1964. But 1964, they came in, and they've only escalated from there. The same with public housing. The same with a lot of programs that came in the mid-'60s. We simply can't afford them. When the federal government spends $3.67 trillion in a year, but only takes in $2.2 trillion in tax revenue, and spends and borrows and $1.5 trillion that we don't have, we're in trouble. And that isn't just 1 year. That's year after year after year. And so that has to end. And so part of that is dismantling the modern welfare state. That is not a part of constitutional government, and I want to get back to constitutional government. And those programs, in my opinion, the states can decide if they want to do them, but we just simply can't afford them at the federal level anymore. We just can't.
Congresswoman, I want to talk a little bit about your 5 years in Congress so far. Can you cite for us 3 examples of legislative successes that you've had since you've been in Congress that have prepared you for the White House?
Well, first of all, I have been in the minority until this January. And so Nancy Pelosi was not particularly interested in advancing my pro-growth agenda. She should have, because we would have been in a much better place today had she embraced that pro-growth agenda. But I've been involved in American energy, legalizing American energy, and I've been a strong advocate for that. I also worked very hard, like I said, bringing 40,000 Americans to Washington, D.C. to fight against Obamacare. I worked very hard on that. I worked very hard against Dodd-Frank. I worked very hard at putting Fannie and Freddie into a receivership, which is an orderly wind down through bankruptcy. I opposed the Automobile Task Force. I opposed the TARP bailout. I was a leader behind closed doors opposing the Bush administration on the TARP bailout. And I worked with Democrats. We worked across the aisle, and we actually brought down the first vote on the $700 billion Wall Street bailout. We didn't prevail on the second one, but you know, I tried in the best way that I could. And now I'm working together with Republicans and Democrats, and we're hoping to actually get a bridge built between Wisconsin and Minnesota, and we think we might get there for a historic first. And I'm praising President Obama for that. It looks like at this point the Obama administration is getting behind that. I just got off a call with the Secretary of Transportation and the Interior, and also Senators Frank and Klobuchar and other representatives. And we think we're going to get that done. So it is possible to get something done, to work together as Republicans and Democrats, and I'm looking forward to it.
Can you just comment a little bit, as the only woman in this race and one of very few who's ever run for president, how do you feel that you've been treated by the press, by the public, and by the other candidates?
Well, the public has been wonderful, absolutely wonderful. People in Iowa have been fantastic and all across the country. So I haven't felt that anyone has seen me as any less or disqualified. And I want to give thanks to my parents for instilling that in me. I had 3 brothers and no sisters, and I was treated just like my brothers. And by the way, it is the best preparation for politics any girl can have, to grow up with 3 brothers and no sister. You learn how to fight, and they learn not to pick on their sister. But as far as the other candidates, they've all been very gracious and very kind. And certainly we have our differences, and we don't see each other at all, really, to speak of, because when we go to events, we aren't there talking to each other. We're talking to people. When we go to debates, essentially we line up behind the curtain, we go on stage, and then we're off talking to people. So we don't spend a lot of time together, but everyone's been very nice and very gracious and very civil. There certainly are differences, and we aren't reticent about pointing them out. And then you asked about the press. Yeah. I think probably everyone wishes they could maybe be treated better by the press, but I'm grateful for the fact that the media has covered our events, and I'm grateful that they've covered our events. And as long as they report what happens in the events, we're more than happy. There's a job that the media has to do, and we understand that. And so it is what it is. So I've never really whined or griped about the press or about coverage, because I'm grateful that they're there and grateful that they're reporting. And that's really the wonderful thing about the day and age that we live in, is that almost anyone can be a journalist today. If you have a flip phone camera, you can make history. And with the advent of the internet, anyone can see what's going on at any given minute. And I think even the 2012 race is so far different than even the 2008 race. Twitter was certainly used in 2008, but much more so, I think, now. I think people even are more familiar with it. And I think it's interesting how the level of expectation that the public and the media have, everything is an instantaneous response. And so we have to be conversant on almost every issue instantaneously as it happens. And that is difficult to be able to do, to be conversant on every topic. But it's a good process. It's very good for us to go through this. Like I started our conversation today. It's one of the most difficult exercises I've ever gone through. But I defend it to the hilt because the job of the presidency will be extraordinarily difficult. It will take everything out of a person and then some. And so it's important for a person to go through this, to have to learn to be better all the time. I appreciate that. I've made mistakes, and I want to be better in this process. And so I appreciate how tough this is, because we want the best candidate as the next president of the United States. We want the best president we can possibly have. Obviously, I have an opinion on that. I think that I'll be the best candidate and the best president.
You've been likened to Sarah Palin. How do you feel about that comparison?
Well, I like Governor Palin. I think she's a wonderful woman. She's raised 5 children, and she's been the governor in Alaska, and she's made great contributions. And I'm grateful for everything that she's contributed. And she blazed a trail herself by being our first female vice presidential candidate on the Republican side. And she took a lot of abuse during the course of the time when she was a candidate. And I appreciate her for her willingness to stand up and serve her country.
Great. Guys, I think that's going to be it. Congresswoman Bachmann, thank you very much for being with us.
Well, they didn't even get a chance to ask a question down there. You should ask them how they feel like they're being treated by the media.
Alice, can you give me one more? Great. Carol?
I'd like to ask you about Afghanistan.
Sure.
In the debate the other night, you criticized the 30,000 troop surge, saying it should have been a 40,000 troop surge. If you were president today, what do you see as the way forward in Afghanistan?
Well, certainly not what the president is doing, not just because he's Democrat and I'm Republican or because I'm running to oppose him. I think that it was a big mistake for the president to dither for 2 months when he did. That impacted that particular fighting season. With 40,000 troops, what could have been done is the commanders could have fought both on the eastern portion of Afghanistan and on the southern portion, because that's where the problem was to defeat the Taliban and all of the proxy militias that Pakistan continually sends into Afghanistan. That wasn't possible when President Obama made his decision, because he failed to fully fulfill the requests that had been made. Then at that point, the decision had to be made only to focus on the south, particularly around Helmand province. But we saw success down there nonetheless. The troops did a good job. We have seen better conditions on the ground, particularly around Kandahar. But the problem is, when we couldn't deal with this problem quickly on both fronts, it's actually lengthened the amount of time that the United States had to stay in that area. My practice is I would like to get in, get the job done, get out, get home. This has just lengthened that amount of time. Now the president has said that he will be pulling the troops out by September of next year. That's less than a year from now. When the president sent those 30,000 troops, it wasn't just the 30,000 troops. He also announced the date that we'd be leaving. That's almost insisting that you're going to lose this effort. And you don't hear the president talk about winning. You don't hear the president talk about victory. But isn't that, after all, why we send troops, to win and to have victory? The president was given peace, or we won the peace in Iraq, and he's determined to lose it in Iraq, and we will by pulling all of our troops out by the end of this year. We already know that because an Iraqi general went up to Iran this week to make friends with Iran, and the Kurds have been doing the same thing. Iran will be coming in to Iraq, and all these gains will be lost. That's why I've been saying to the president that he needs to go back to the negotiating table and demand that Iraq, a wealthy country, not a poor country, should pay us back. We spent over $805 billion, and Iraq should pay us back for what we've expended, and we lost the greater treasure, which is 4,400 American lives. When it comes to Afghanistan, at this point, the president has made a tough situation almost impossible for General Allen, because now that the troops are coming out, what Afghani would be enlisted to help us, knowing that they're going to be left with the Taliban? So the Taliban's going to stay there. They live there. And so if they enlist to help us, they're a target. And they don't see that there's any victory. And so what the United States has done is let down our allies, and we've invigorated our enemies. And that's the failure of the president's policies. He's choosing to fail in Iraq. He is choosing to fail in Afghanistan. We cannot have this over with and see Afghanistan stand on their own by next September. And so he's making a deliberate decision. There's a real problem with the Haqqani network right now in the East. We haven't even started dealing with the East. So we can't possibly hold the South and deal with the East when the president is pulling the troop levels out.
Do you think the Republican nominee is going to have to go in January 20th, 2013 and increase troop levels?
Well, I intend not to be the nominee, but the next president of the United States. And so I would be inheriting a situation where by 2012, the president, conveniently enough, just before the election, would have made sure that he pulled the troops out. And really, it's more than obvious. The president is taking his orders from General Axelrod. He's not listening to General Allen in Afghanistan. He's not listening to General Austin in Iraq. He's listening to General Axelrod, and he's essentially moved CENTCOM to Chicago. And he's also listening to General David Plouffe. That's who he's listening to. Everything now is about his reelection. And I think that's the lowest of the low for a commander-in-chief to make military decisions based upon his political reelection calculus versus making military decisions based upon what's in the best interest of the United States and our security and our defense. Because after all, that's what needs to be the number one issue of the commander-in-chief.
One last question before we get a chance to say goodbye to you. Less than 7 weeks, I'm looking at the calendar up here. Folks and I were going to be headed to Caucus night. And we certainly will be sitting here and spending some time talking about our endorsement. Tell me why you should win the support of Caucus goers and also why you should earn our endorsement.
Well, because I am most reflective of the values I believe that Iowans hold and what they're looking for in the next president of the United States. Iowans want the next president to be able to understand the economy and know what to do about turning it around. I do. I have that perspective and I have that background both as a self-made individual who our family went below poverty at one point, and I had to work my way through college and establish myself. I know what it is to be middle class. I know what it is to be below poverty. I know what it is to come out of that. I have that American value of no one owes you a living and give an honest day's work for an honest day's pay, and your word is your bond. Those are very important Iowa values. I've lived those. I was taught those by my family and by 7 generations of my family that have lived in Iowa since the 1850s. I best espouse those values. I have the practical knowledge as someone who started a business from scratch and runs it profitably today. I have that business acumen. I have the background as a tax lawyer, also as someone who sat on the Financial Services Committee in the United States Congress. I know what needs to be done. I formulated a coherent, good plan that makes sense, and I put that out on my website. And I know what needs to be done, and I can bring people together to make it happen. I cut my teeth on education reform as a mother. You were going to ask me something about foster children. We've been married, my husband and I, 33 years. We have 5 biological children that we've raised, and they're all grown now, and also 23 foster children, and they're all grown and gone now. And I got involved in politics because I was a mother. And as a mother, I was very concerned about what I saw my foster children bringing home in the backpack. And so I decided to get involved. And I got involved, and ultimately I led an education reform movement in Minnesota, and I gave 5 years of my life to education reform. And my husband and I were also part of a group of parents that started the first K-12 charter school in the United States, and our school was focused on at-risk kids. And we both have broken hearts for at-risk kids, my husband and I. And so we got involved in education reform, and I'm very proud to say that we became the first state, perhaps the only state, that repealed the federal education standards, which were politically correct, dumbed-down standards, and instead we put in place. That was my my effort that I led and that I moved. Then it went into the Minnesota Senate, and we put into place academic standards. Just like when I grew up in Iowa, I attended public schools. They were fantastic. I had such a good education growing up in Iowa public schools. And then I went up to Minnesota, and they were very good schools up there as well. And that's why I was shocked at what my foster children were bringing home in a backpack, because I'd always been supremely blessed by the schools that I had gone to, and I was shocked. And I'll give you one example. My 11th grade foster daughter in math class brought home posters to color. Well, our 3-year-olds color. But if anyone needs a leg up in life, it's a foster child. And I related because in my own family, we had gone below poverty. And my mother said to me when we lost everything, she said to me, you know, Michelle, there's one thing that never can be taken away from you, and it's your education, so study. And she was right, and I listened. I was 13 years of age, and I studied. And because I paid attention, I did really well in school, that helped me to make it in life. And so I wanted for our foster children to also have that same opportunity, and I wanted them to have the best they could. Well, if in 11th grade they're coloring, they're not going to have the best opportunities. It would hurt them first, but it would hurt business people like my husband and I, because we'd have people wanting jobs that aren't well trained, and it would hurt productivity. So I got involved, and I led that education reform movement. And what's really remarkable about that is that it was Minnesota, a Democrat state. And what I saw is that this wasn't a partisan issue. I never once said, you know, if I was a conservative or not. I went all over my state and spoke and gave talks about education. And because of me going around the state, people put pressure on their own senator, on their own House member, to get rid of this education program. It's called the Profile of Learning. And they did. And I was serving in the minority in the Minnesota Senate, and we actually got rid of this program. Everybody said it never happened because education is the #1 budget item in almost any state's budget. And this is the biggest program Minnesota had ever adopted, but we got rid of it. And that's why I know, I mean, it's Pollyanna to think you can fight City Hall, but I really believe that we can repeal Obamacare. It's going to be the toughest thing that will ever happen. It's going to take a miracle to do it. But I believe in miracles. I think that we can get rid of Obamacare because people hate it. I saw us do it with education reform in Minnesota, in a Democrat state where you would think it's impossible. But I see we can do it on a national level. And it isn't that I'm against health care for people, certainly not for poor people. I want them to have it. But I think we can deliver better health care at better prices directly to people. Because that's, if there's anything Medicare has shown us, it's fraud, blatant fraud. And we've got to weed out that fraud. We're going to see it in Obamacare. And we want to make sure that people get the finest health care that they can. Like I said, the greatest quality health care for the greatest number of people at the lowest possible price. That's the definition of the free market.
Great. Congresswoman, thank you very much.
Thank
Pursue the
you.
Republican nomination. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And that's why I want to be President of the United States. So there you go.
Thanks for coming in. I know you're so busy.
Thank
Good to
you.
see you.
Well, thank you
You
for
bet.
the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your patience. We may not agree, but thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you for coming. General Axelrod, huh?
That's going to get me in trouble. Hi there. Thank you. Good to see you again. Hey, I'm glad you asked a question. That was great.
Try not to.
I have to be back here editing while everyone else.
Oh, I'm glad that we could. I'm glad we could.
Fun. See you on the trail, Congress.
Okay, good to see you.
Thanks a lot.
Hey, you're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Andy, you want to...
The guy who holds the boom mic gets to shake hands. Oh, I get Thank you. Thanks for
Hey, Alice, thank you. Hey, Alice. Yes, sir. You're going to call later on, talk about this debate.
Okay, yeah, good news.
Yeah, thank you.
What I missed.
Thanks, guys.
Well, I wanted to make sure Kathy didn't have to do it.